Hello and welcome to episode 20 of What Makes This Song Special. As always, thanks so much to everyone who has subscribed, liked, shared the video podcast, whatever you would call this, so far. For anyone who's tuning in for the first time, what I take each week is a song that I feel is special to me for a reason that reminds me of something in my life or a time in my life. I talk a wee bit about that, give you a wee story. I then talk a little bit about the song or the band or the artist and do a wee bit of a kind of vocal coach reaction to the singer's technique, and then I do a part two where I do a cover version of the song. So this week's song is going to be Coldplay, The Scientist, as you probably already know from the title. So I'll take you back. The story for me, the first time I heard the song, it was the end of August 2002. And Coldplay had just released their second album, A Rush of Blood to the Head. I'm going to rewind a wee bit because I want to say that as disappointed as I've been with some of the Coldplay albums over the last few years, I don't think they warrant the hatred they receive at times. I think they deserve a lot of credit for those first few albums, especially the first two. I think the first two albums are amazing. And again, these things come down to personal preference and personal opinion, but I think the songs, the production, the instrumentation, I think they're really exciting. The first couple of albums, I think when I first heard Parachutes, which was their debut album, it was the first time I'd been impressed with a band in so long. And the best thing was that for me, it wasn't a band from years ago that had split up or were a bunch of old characters or who had maybe a member or two or three members had already died and were touring with a new lineup. This was a band that I could get into and maybe go and see live and look forward to their releases, which I could never really do with a lot of the bands and artists that I liked growing up because they were all from the 70s and 80s and I wasn't born until the 80s, so I didn't really get to see a lot of those bands in their prime. I'm always jealous of folk like my parents' generation who actually went to see bands like Queen and Pink Floyd and the Rolling Stones and things like that live, which I never really got the chance to do. So this was a band that I could get into, a band that I could go and see, and who were interesting musically and sonically, if you like. I feel like the sound they gave each album in the early days had a real identity. Their album art had a real identity. They were albums the way albums are supposed to be, not a greatest hits or a collection of songs. Real albums that focused on a moment in time and had a musical or lyrical theme, if you like, which I think is what an album should be. I think that's what an album should be, not a kind of best of. So anyway, I'd gone out to buy Rush of Blood to the Head, their second album, the day that it was released because I was so impressed with the first album. I was quite excited about it, and as I said, something I've not been able to do very often is go out and buy one of my favourite bands' releases because they're all kind of expired. Even by 2002, they'd all expired. So I was working at a place called Parklands Country Club in the south side of Glasgow, which I've mentioned a couple of times on previous videos, and it was only about a mile from my house. I hadn't had the chance to listen to the album the day I bought it, so the morning after, at about 7 o'clock in the morning, en route to the early shift, Rush of Blood to the Head was getting its first listen. As I walked to work, it was just getting light, and I had the volume pumped up in my headphones as I left the house. And the first song on the album is Politic, which just sets the scene for the whole album. It's just this big, epic sounding, it's welcoming you into the journey. It's just this epic sound, and by the time I'd reached the halfway point of my walk to work, I heard this old piano playing these block chords, which stood out because amongst this very shiny, perfect production, you could hear this old upright piano that sounds like it just had a couple of microphones stuck onto it and someone just pressed record, and it sounds just very, very, very organic and dry. And then Chris Martin's voice enters with, again, minimal reverb. It sounds really organic and just sounds like he's right there. You're just listening to somebody in a room playing an old piano. And then these other instruments begin to join in and it starts to grow into the sound of what you've heard so far in the album. That big production starts to come in, the strings, the acoustic guitar, the harmonies, drums, and these just effects that make everything sound really big and impressive. And it was an awesome song. That obviously I'm talking about the scientist. So yeah, it just draws you in. There's an element of something that's very inviting, and also something that's very honest and what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think, but it's very welcoming, and it's very intimate. That is the word I was looking for. It's very intimate, and then on a sort of polar opposite of that intimacy, you've got this huge production that sort of takes you on a journey. So I'm listening to this and really enjoying it. And I was pulling these tiny little, I don't know what you call them, pine cones that you get on conifers. You know, those little things, you pull them off. And I used to always squeeze them and then smell the kind of piney smell inside them. Or I would flick them onto the road, or I don't know, I've always done things like that with plants when I'm always fidgeting with things. So I remember picking a slightly bigger one, and I threw it and I sort of kicked it. And I had the music up so loud that I think in my head I felt like I was the only person in the world. And I was listening to these songs, and then at one point I flicked or kicked like a slightly bigger pine. I mean, they're small, but I kicked it and it over to my left, and it hit a car that was driving past. Now bear in mind it's tiny, so as I said, it's unlikely that it's going to have done any damage to a car, but I think the shock of seeing someone or something else on the road with me, because it had been so empty, startled me, and I panicked, especially as the car skidded and stopped right on the road just ahead of me. And I thought, oh no, like that's hit a window or something and they're going to now confront me. So I was getting ready for some sort of confrontation, and immediately starting to work out in my head what I'm going to say and sort of how I'm going to excuse myself. And this person's head pokes out of the window with a big smile, and he says, "Richie, do you want a lift?" So a lot of people at the time called me Richie. I don't know how that happened, but when I first started working in Parklands, I think one person, I think maybe the head chef, Jimmy, called me Richie, and it just stuck. So everybody at that era, for some reason, called me Richie. It was just for a few years I get called Richie by a lot of people. So he shouts, "Richie, do you want a lift?" And it was one of the personal trainers from work. It was a guy called Derek Robertson, and Derek was like, he was a former Marine and an absolute maniac. I just remember when I first started working there, he took a bit of a shine to me, because when I started working out in the gym, I wouldn't ever give up. I was like really determined. I would never give up. I'd always do one last rep or one last mile on the running machines and things like that, on the treadmills. And he liked that. He liked that kind of ethic, that work ethic in me. So he used to always kind of come and chat to me. He liked folk at putting 100% in the gym. And he had this famous boot camp. It was crazy boot camp style circus class that he ran in the gym, where he put a bucket in the middle of the room, and you weren't allowed to leave the circuit class until you'd been sick in the bucket. I never ever partook in that class, but this is a posh country club in the south side of Glasgow where people were paying nearly £1,000 a month for a membership. So when the owner found out, he immediately banned the class and told Derek to think of something less Navy SEALs or SAS training and more in line with sort of helping middle-aged, middle-class people lose weight, which is what the kind of purpose of the gym was in that club. There was another time I remember watching him do a personal training session with a guy, and he was wearing focus mitts, and the guy was doing some boxing rounds on the focus mitts, and the guy was hitting really hard, and I was just looking on. And I remember at one point Derek just shouted stop, and he pulled his hand out of the focus mitt to reveal like this pinky finger was just like sticking out horizontally. And he just grabbed it with his other hand and sort of clunked it back into place while letting out this big grunt, and then stuck the focus mitt on and shouted at the guy, you know, "Come on, what are you waiting for?" sort of thing. So the guy was bonkers, as I said, tough. And a nice guy. So anyway, going back to the story, he'd stopped to offer me a lift to work. I don't think he'd even noticed that I'd thrown the little acorn at his car, and He had this really cool, certainly from the outside, he had this really cool sort of beaten up old Jeep, or maybe an old Land Rover Defender, that type of car. And when I got inside the car, there was no floor. Like there was, so I get in the car, sat down in the seat and looked down at my feet, and there was no, you could see the road under your feet. I swear to God, like it was like a Flintstones car. Like for anyone who remembers the Flintstones, you could literally see the road underneath. So there's no floor inside the car. And thankfully the journey was like a couple of minutes round the corner. We reached the car park of the country club, and he asked me to pick his rucksack up from the back seat for him, as it was my side. And I went to pick this rucksack up from the back seat, and it honestly weighed about 25 kilograms. And I think I jokingly said something to him like, "Jesus, Derek, what's in here, bricks?" And he replied to me with the straightest face ever. He went, "Yeah, bricks, Richie." He said, "Wee tip for you, son. Run with a bag of bricks in your back. It makes you strong." And then he just put it on and ran off. And I remember laughing all the way into the kitchen, desperate to tell my mate Crawford, who I used to work with in the kitchen, about the Flintstones car and the bag of bricks, knowing that it would just be another extremely amusing story about Derek that we were collecting and telling each other every time we met him. We had another story. So I remember later that afternoon he came up to the kitchen when the head chef and sous chef were on their break, and it was just me in the kitchen. I was looking after the empty kitchen, and he asked me for the office keys because he said he was going to leave a present for Jimmy and Tony, who were my bosses at the time. So I wasn't going to question Derek. As I said, he was too much of a kind of mad guy. So I handed him the keys, and he went into the office, and I just got on with chopping onions or whatever I was doing. And about 10 minutes later, Derek goes into the fridge, takes out a few sirloin steaks, puts them inside the famous rucksack, and he says to me, "It's been nice knowing you, Richie. I'm moving on. Keep up singing, keep up training. See you later." And off he went. It was the last time I ever saw him. And I remember about a half an hour later, the chefs came back from their split shift. And I remember I just heard them walking past and get into the office, and then sort of shouting me through, because obviously I'd been in charge. And as I went into the office, it turns out the present he'd left them was that he'd spray painted the words "No Surrender" on the wall of the kitchen office, because the chefs were Celtic fans and he was a Rangers fan. I won't go into the details of the Celtic Rangers, that mad Catholic Protestant world that seems to be a big talking point in Glasgow and in Scotland and in Ireland, of course, but it seems to have made its way to Glasgow many years ago, and so if you don't get it, I'm sorry, it's complicated, it's political and it's religious, but if you do get it, it's quite amusing. So I found it funny. As a fan of neither of those teams, I found it amusing, and even the chefs, who were both Celtic fans, found it amusing, just because, again, it was just something ridiculous that Derek had done. And that was the last we ever heard or saw of Derek Robertson. So an absolute madman and a lovely guy who gave me a lift to work one day as I listened to The Scientist. So when I listened to The Scientist, that's what I think of. I hadn't, at that point in my life, I hadn't long met my now wife, Lynn's. I was writing lots of songs. I'd just been signed to a small record label, and I was playing in different bands. And I remember feeling excited hearing that album. It felt like the beginning of something new. And my life was kind of changing in that direction as well. Lots of new things were happening, and it just inspired me to sort of try and make my own music more big and full and ethereal. And the production really blew my mind. I just wanted to replicate that sound on my own songs. And as I say, I think Coldplay definitely got unfairly judged at times, you know. So, yeah, there's the B story. That's what it reminds me of. That's why it's special to me. Reminds me of that time in my life. Bit about Coldplay. I don't think they need much of an introduction. Coldplay are a 4-piece band from London who have become the biggest band of the last 20 years. That's not me saying that, that's just fact. They've sold over 100 million albums worldwide, which makes me question why I said earlier that they're kind of hated and you know, underrated, and they're not underrated. I do feel though, like genuinely, I play about 100 gigs a year, and I play a lot of cover versions and things at like weddings and things like that as well. And I quite often will ask brides and grooms, or I'll ask people if I'm doing a corporate function, are there any artists you don't want me to do? Are there any artists you don't want me to do covers? And the most commonly requested don't play is Coldplay. So that they do, as much as being the biggest band in the world, they have got so many haters, and I don't know why. I don't know why people have decided to dislike them. I don't know if it's a jealousy thing, or if it's just a bit like, I suppose, when I was a kid in the 90s and Oasis came out. I hated Oasis because everybody else liked them. I don't know, there was a thing about, I just didn't like the popularity. Now, in retrospect, in hindsight, I think Oasis were a great band, but at the time I didn't like how popular they were, so I just decided I was going to, stand my ground and listen to different things. So maybe that's what it is with Coldplay. Maybe people just feel that they've had too much success, and they just don't like that. I don't know, but I think they're an amazing band. I think they've done really well. As I said earlier, I think they've been a kind of almost a chameleon type band, in that each album's had a totally different sound, and I haven't always enjoyed each album's sound, but I think the first two albums are perfect. I think they're perfect albums. I think number 3 and number 4 being X and Y and Viva La Vida. I'm sure it's called Viva La Vida. But I think they're both great albums as well. Maybe not quite as good as the first two, and then I think it did sort of take a bit of a dip. But then everybody's got their own opinion. So anyway, I'll dive into Chris Martin's vocal technique. I think Chris Martin's got a really interesting voice. I think for what he lacks in great vocal technique, and I always hate to say that like I'm dissing somebody, but I think he more than makes up for that in style and emotion. I think his voice speaks the lyrics directly to the listener in a really emotive manner, which I think is really important. It's one of the most important things, if not the most important thing about a singer. Somebody like Bob Dylan, not a great singer, but amazing at telling a story and making it come to life, and being emotive with it. So his voice sort of jumps around regularly. Chris Martin, he moves a lot from chest voice to head voice and back, which he doesn't always do that smoothly, especially singing live, but it definitely gives his voice a very distinctive style. We've spoken before on the channel about Elton John's ability to do the flipping between chest and head voice very well. Chris doesn't nail it quite like Elton does for two reasons. Firstly, he doesn't have the support. He doesn't support his voice, with diaphragmatic breathing in the same way that Elton does. And secondly, and most importantly, his head voice is more falsetto than head voice at times. So in that, the vocal cords aren't as close together, or adducted, or connected. So many terms for the same thing. But they're not as close together, which gives them more of a fluty, like falsetto sound, as opposed to a stronger sort of connected head voice sound. That makes it much harder for him to transition from chest to head voice without it sounding a little bit messy at times, as I said, especially live, because there's often too much air passing through the middle of the chords, which isn't ideal for what he does. That being said, I love Chris Martin's voice. I think I can't imagine anyone else singing those Coldplay songs. I think it suits the songs. I think it suits the lyric. And it's a very honest and pure and emotive sound and tone that he's got, so I do think he sounds like he's had some sort of adenoid issue going on. There's just a sound that makes me think that. I could be wrong. I've never read that that's an issue for Chris, and I've never heard anybody else say that, but I don't know. I think it sounds like he's got some sort of tonsil or adenoid issue going on, just because there's a slight frogginess in his throat at times. But he definitely doesn't sound, like somebody who has tried to be a technically fantastic singer. I don't think he sounds like somebody who warms up or practices scales, etc., which is a shame, because his voice won't have as long a shelf life without all that good stuff. But as I said, it sounds like I'm telling you all negative things about it. I think he's got a great sounding voice. I think it's a really cool voice, albeit not a vocally, not a technically excellent vocalist, but a really cool voice, and a voice that speaks the lyrics in an emotional manner, which is the most important thing. Anyway, I won't bore you too much with vocal technique. If you're looking for help with your vocals, you can contact me directly. We can book a session. It's what I do with students every day all over the world. We can jump on Zoom or Skype, and I can listen to your voice and pinpoint little technical things that we could work on and improve on. So that's the end of today's episode. A fairly short one, and a daft wee story about what the scientist makes me think of when I hear it, where I was in my life at the time, and that day, that moment when I first listened to it, and it was interrupted by a crazy ex-Marine giving me a lift in a Flintstones car. That's what makes the song special to me. What makes the song special to you? Leave a wee comment, and we can discuss why it's a special song. I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.